The Patterson Foundation
strengthens people, organizations, and communities by focusing on issues that address mutual aspirations, foster wide participation, and encourage learning and sharing.
All right, Tom Kamber, welcome to the Patterson Foundation Beyond the Blog podcast.
Thank you. Oh, that's Mr. Burry.
No, that's not a mess up. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the Beyond the Blog podcast, but it's also focused specifically on digital access for all and a follow-up to the Suncoast Connect Symposium of the last couple of days. So you came down here from New York City. You've been here for a couple of days. Tell me, what brought you down here in the first place?
I'm excited about the Patterson Foundation because they have a kind of a regional focus with a public interest technology point of view, which is a fairly unusual philanthropic perspective in the U.S. So, I'm very active, of course, in the older adults perspective in digital inclusion. I think a lot about different policy options, different kinds of program models. And a few years ago, I was approached by Patterson to speak on one of the panels at an event they were having. And I was really struck by the focus on building kind of community projects around digital inclusion. Often something you think of as, something the federal government does through the Department of Commerce or something that, wonky nonprofits like me go out and do. But to see a foundation that's really working with a lot of community partner sites and working on access and working on promoting different kinds of projects around it with a kind of a broader strategic point of view, I think it's really interesting. So the conference, when they were having it this year and they offered to let me come down and talk about my work, provided a good opportunity to meet some people and explore some ideas together.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad that you were here. I know people definitely enjoyed your session yesterday. Could you just tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we can kind of dive in a little deeper?
Yeah, sure. My name's Tom Kamber, of course. I started a nonprofit called Older Adults Technology Services. OATS is the acronym, and I'm the founder. Started in 2004. And so I've been here for 21 years doing this work. Feels like a lifetime in some ways. And we are an affiliate of AARP, so technically our name is OATS from AARP now. We're a corporate affiliate of AARP, so we've been able to work with them nationally. We are a national nonprofit organization that provides technology programs and educational opportunities for people over the age of 50. Actually, they're crafted for people more past the age of 60. We have a lot of 70 and 80 and 90-year-olds in our programs. The programs that we run are called Senior Planet, so our website is seniorplanet.org. Our spaces that we train at that are our own centers are called Senior Planet Centers, and so our kind of client-facing programs are Senior Planet. Everything we do is free, has always been free for the end users. So we run a hotline, we run courses, we run centers that people can drop in. We don't charge, and we don't have any restrictions on income or, where you come from or how old you are or anything. It's as long as you're older and you want to come in and use some technology and build some community with us, we provide classes for people. Last year, we had 670,000 people come to programs around the country and online. We do about 500,000 of those are online program participants. This morning we have a fitness program going on called Morning Stretch that has about 500 people who come on to a Zoom class and work out together. It's really a fun project. So we do a lot of direct programming in that way, and then we spend quite a bit of time building models around using tech for the future of aging. So we're really interested in what's going on in aging, how the country is changing, how people's patterns of aging are different. Coming down to Florida, I'm reminded that my grandparents used to come to Florida from New Jersey every winter. And our lifestyles are so different from then to now. And I'm now in my late 50s and realizing that my patterns of living and my generation's patterns of living as we get older are very different. And technology gives us a chance to do things in a new way. And so OATS spends a lot of time working with philanthropic foundations, with other partnerships, with some federal government players, with some state and local government entities to try to build kind of models and patterns to use technology more successfully. So we have a kind of a programmatic plus, systems building kind of framework that we use.
Yeah, I'm curious about both. So before I do that, though, why did you start the nonprofit in the first place? Let's bring back to 2004, or if it was earlier, what was the impetus for this?
I am a lifelong social social impact do-gooder, I guess. It's funny, I was just here in Florida. One of my friends from high school lives down here in Sarasota, so we went out to dinner and reminding myself that back when I was, 15 years old, while they were all working at the local, Pizza Hut or whatever it was, I was out like raising money for environmental nonprofits and knocking on doors and stuff. So I've always been kind of interested in civic kind of health and what we can do to make the world a better place. And I worked in housing for a bunch of years after college. And when 9/11 happened in New York City, I was working on a project, an economic revitalization project in Lower Manhattan, to try to bring back businesses and residents after people had left. And we launched a website called Voices of Lower Manhattan. And at the website party, I was getting ready to prepare for the party the week before. The phone rang and I got a call from an 80-year-old woman who said, I want to come to this web party, but I don't know exactly what the web is. And and I'm 80 and I'm not sure I would actually feel all that welcome at something like this. Is it the right kind of thing for me to go to? And her name was Pearl Schur. And I remember being really struck by the way she framed the question. It wasn't just like, where's the party? But it was like, would I be welcome to come to your party? Which set off some bells for me, as you can imagine. And one thing led to another. Pearl did come to the party. We had a very successful web launch, but I brought her in to start giving her some free tutoring on technology. And she was an amazing person, an Army veteran and a little social activist down there. She helped get a bus shelter in front of her senior center and things like that. She was really great. They called her the grandmother of Lower Manhattan. And she came to my office every Monday morning for a year. And we learned so much together. It was pretty amazing. She would show up with her breakfast wrapped up in a napkin. And I would teach her everything from how to use a mouse to how to do emails. And eventually I started getting emails from the local public officials, the state senators and stuff. And they'd be like, who is this Pearl Schur woman? And why did you give her my email? Tell her to stop calling me. And I was like, she's one of your constituents. And now part of the point is that as we get older, we shouldn't lose those tools to communicate with our public officials because somehow we don't know how to use the technology, right? And so this was back in 2004. There weren't really almost any nonprofits really active doing that, focusing on that intersection between aging and tech. And I realized this is something I can work on. Of course, you get all cocky thinking like, oh, I'm a smart guy. I'll start a nonprofit. I'll raise $1 million. I'll change the world, And 3 years later, I think I'd raised like $50,000. But we were learning how to do programs. And I was able to find local participants, mostly that I originally knew through my housing work. And I'd go to the old housing buildings that I would work and say, would you guys want to help me design a technology class for seniors? And people said, sure. They were all the tenant association leaders are always in their 60s and 70s. And so I was out in Bedford-Stuyvesant sitting in tenant buildings at the Betty Shabazz complex, I remember. And the older folks there helped me design curriculum. They told me what they wanted to learn. They told me how they wanted to learn. More importantly, they told me how they didn't want to learn. I think a lot of people traumatize older people by trying to force inappropriate methodologies on them for learning, assuming they know things that they don't, and then being nasty when they're legitimately not aware of something that didn't happen before they, that they never saw, but, and didn't grow up with. So we started building free classes and it became kind of took off and very slowly. I mean, it's one of those sort of, we were never a kind of, hockey stick kind of change overnight where somehow like one day we got an investment from a venture capital fund or anything, but we grew about 25% a year, year over year for years and years. And the AARP stuff really helped us grow. Now we have 80 staff and a budget of $20 million and we actually are national. It's kind of cool. It's amazing to realize like something that started at your kitchen table then turned into something that is all over the country.
Yeah, I mean, more than kind of cool. I think
satisfying.
Yeah, and there's so many like really, I think, powerful like strands of like nuggets of knowledge to pull from what you're sharing there in terms of like how to go about making an impact. Right? There's like an organic, authentic experience that you had in a role where this sort of need arose to you, and then your story about Pearl around like real authentic engagement with somebody who was really feeling the need that you were identifying, and then a co-designing of the curriculum and the experience in partnership with community and allowing it to grow organically over time. There's a lot in there about how to build something and build something that lasts. I mean, it's for no small reason that you're still at it, right? 21 years later, and have continued to grow.
Yeah, it's interesting with entrepreneurship sometimes where there are pieces that have to kind of fit together, and it's never exactly. There's no formula that you can consistently apply, but something about the person, right, where you come from. something about a method. Nobody called it design thinking back then. They called it asking questions. It was like, I remember sitting down, there was a curriculum that the Housing Authority was using in New York, and it was a big thick binder. And I sat down with, his name was Charlotte Rogers in Bedford-Stuyvesant, the lieutenant leader there. And we went through the book. And the first, it was, everybody wanted to learn how to use internet and the email, right? That was the basic thing. But as we started flipping through the first chapter was on what the parts of the computer are. The central processing unit and the keyboard and the mouse and the monitor and things like that. And you spend like 45 minutes learning the names of everything. And then there's all this stuff about, how to turn on and what the screen is showing, and then how to, because you have desktop icons, how to resize your desktop icons in Microsoft XP. And 59 pages later, 3 hours into the class, they still hadn't seen the internet. Like nobody had actually bothered to turn on a page and show them what everybody was there to see. And, Charlotte said, this is going to really blow us all up. And by the way, the class is 3 hours long and meets every 2 weeks. So, who can sit through 3 hours of computer education? And then after you let 14 days go by, most people can't remember half of what they learned anyways. And so she said, maybe we should make the classes a little shorter and maybe we should be more often. So we started testing that, and we joked around about it, but the guys in the tenant association had to pee after about an hour and 15, an hour and a half, older men, and sitting near the bathroom, right? And so we started joking about it, but it was actually turned out to be a pretty good stopping point for the first session. So you would start at, 10 a.m. and around 11:15, you'd wrap up. But the point was come back 2 days later. So we would meet twice a week. You do Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday. And the repetition and the shorter classes made it a lot more fun for people, a lot less stressful for people that were learning. And so that just sort of naturally became the framework. And then, we realized it's common sense, right? Put the email and the web learning early, get people focused on it. But we also tried things like, making big fonts. Like everybody says, oh, you have to make all the letters really big. We made the fonts really big, but what happened when you create too much large fonts on the page is that it actually blocks the page out with big letters, and it doesn't read very well, and there's not enough white space. So we learned that there's actually, you can go a little bit bigger, but better to have a little less text on the page, make it a little less text heavy, a little bit better contrast. But don't overdo some kind of preconception about how people have visual impairment when in fact just good design works there. So we were kind of testing all these things out, which felt very organic at the time, and nobody was really paying us for it. There was like a community center down the street that was paying us like $15,000 to run the classes in their local site because they had some extra money that summer. But in today's parlance, people would say, "Oh, that's a co-design model that you're using there," And it's true. It really just did come out like that. It was like iterative. It was really participatory. We didn't have a lot of preconceptions. We blew up the preconceptions that we had in a lot of cases. So I think we were lucky to have my background was very well suited to what I was trying to do. The people there were really well set up to try to want to do something like this. Technology and older adults, when you actually do it right, it's like chocolate and peanut butter. So it really has created a lot of momentum. And I think we were fortunate to have those elements when we started out.
Yeah. So I'm curious about how it's evolved over time. And you mentioned a partnership, being a corporate affiliate of AARP. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came to be, what that looks like? What does that even mean?
Yeah, that was also iterative because we tried to work with them years and years and years ago. And we had a really great project, and we were looking forward to growing that. But they had took a different direction with their work, excuse me. And they, AARP wanted to have more program impact in terms of certain mission-related areas that they're really focused on. And technology has been one for years at AARP. And their chief operating officer about 6 years ago or 7 years ago decided, rather than try to rebuild the programs internally and invent the wheel, let's go out and see who out there has good models we can work with, not just in technology, but maybe other areas. And so they did a kind of broad search around the country for nonprofits that might be interested in this kind of thing and good fits. And we were the one they picked. They looked at 600 groups, and
Wow.
not all of them in technology, of course, but they called and said, we're interested in exploring an affiliation. And I didn't really know what they're talking about at the time. I was like, why would we want to affiliate with you? And they were like, why don't you come down to Washington and meet the team? And I had all this whole idea, because we're New York based originally, and we're a pretty eclectic group of people that, with like half our staff have, they wear leather jackets and have tattoos and, go to punk rock shows and stuff. So we thought of ourselves as this kind of hardy band of I don't know, the misfit toy kind of world a little bit. But we went down to AARP, and they really are pushing for more innovation. And they have a whole center there called the Hatchery, where they're looking for more innovative ideas. They were starting a thing that turned out to be it's now called the Age Tech Collaborative, which is building relationships with innovative for-profit businesses that are doing work in the tech space. And so we were a good fit for them. And they said, listen, we're like, well, invest something in OATS's growth. We'll help you sponsor more senior planet centers. We still have to raise most of our money. You're not allowed to be a nonprofit and be like a wholly owned subsidiary of another entity. It doesn't work that way. There's actually a specific tax requirement called the public use test, where you have to receive, I think it's at least 60% of your money from diverse sources. You can't be like they're not supposed to be like a one-off kind of thing. So we still have our headquarters in New York. We still have our board of directors. We still have our 501c3 status. We have our team intact. We've got our programs. AARP basically just said, we want to help you get to scale and have more impact, but we're not going to tell you how to do the work. That's what you're experts in. We still have our partnerships, and even many of our funders who are not part of the AARP universe, but are funders that we brought in from before that we had from different relationships, are still active with us. And so they've been really, it's given us an enormous amount of flexibility, but we share services. So they take care of a lot of the kind of, I don't know, I'm a sort of innovative guy. So the whole infrastructure of things like procurement and HR and financial auditing and, dealing with facilities and all the kind of drudgery of administration, they do all of that. And and so they call it shared services. So they take care of all of that stuff. We're on the AARP payroll system now. So my staff are able to get eventually AARP benefits, and that really matters in terms of holding the best people. And then they've got those 53 state offices at AARP that all are around the country, and Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. And so we work with those state offices to reach local communities. They help us with outreach. They help us with partnership development. We collaboratively do programs. We'll do town halls on technology. I'll give you one example. We're very passionate about broadband access for older adults. And when we joined AARP, we had just published a report focusing on the question of how many older adults are online at home. Everybody just assumes if you walk out on the street here in Sarasota and you say, well, how, who's got internet around here? Everybody's going to assume, oh, well, everybody's got internet at home, right? It turns out that's not true. And even though the country is increasingly subscribing, there are a lot of lower income people that can't afford internet. There's a huge gap between young and old in terms of who's paying for internet at home for broadband, wireline broadband access, through your, cable arrangement or through, fiber optic. And so we did a study that showed that 42% of older Americans don't have wireline internet at home. And AARP wanted to help us solve that problem. And so their advocacy group in Washington, they have a public affairs team that's, super impressive down on Capitol Hill. They get a lot of attention, and they added to the list. I don't know that we were the just positive factor, but we certainly helped encourage it. But they, wanted to focus on that. The federal government launched a thing called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, because we all remember what happened with COVID, that it was disproportionately affecting older adults because they were not on the internet, right? So you've got all these folks that are struggling with, the whole country's grappling with a terrible crisis, but you got 42% of older people that don't have the internet access to be able to do the Zoom calls, right? So, if you've got internet, you're able to make that choice between if you want to stay home and do it on Zoom or if you want to go to the event in person. That's your personal choice. But if you don't have internet, you're forced to go out, which puts you at physical risk. And a lot of people suffered from that. So we realized that we wanted to focus on that. The federal government passed this emergency broadband benefit to help people get online, lower income folks. And then that grew into a national program called the Affordable Connectivity Program. So about 4 or 5 years there was a little window where for the first time, we had an actual federal subsidy for low-income people to help pay for broadband. If I remember correctly, I think it was like 7 million people signed up. It was one of the most successful, programs of that kind ever, and a huge number of them were older adults. Program's expensive, of course, because a lot of people wanted to do it. Federal government is very concerned about costs lately, so they sunsetted the program just about a year or so ago. Many people are still receiving those benefits, and then many of the telecoms companies are still participating in different versions of the kind of like follow-on programs. And there's talk of updating it and creating a new version of it through some reforms with the Universal Service Fund. But that kind of a relationship between us and AARP, where we're a kind of, we're helping to sort of craft some of the concepts a little bit, but they're really committed to the bigger picture on the technology side, is a wonderful kind of 1-2 punch to make a difference, right? We're out there teaching people in the community, and we're helping build awareness and throughputs where if you get online, I can help you use the internet and I can help you make the most of it. But if you don't have the money to get online, AARP is out there advocating to make sure you can get that benefit. So those kinds of dynamics have been really helpful for us. We're now 5 years into the affiliation. I mean, it's at least 90% of it, I would say it's like a balance of 90-10. There are days where I have to go, like they're a big company, right? So I have to go down and, you've got a lot of meetings and things like that. But boy, it's a godsend, I have to tell you, to be able to work with a big partner like that can carry some of your program support and help you get to scale. And then, we're on their leadership team. Like I help them with their strategy, and I go down there and work with their team. Their CEO, Maisha Minter-Jordan, just came down to Miami and visited our center there, which was really a kind of a special thing for us. And the center was partly financed by AARP as well. So we built an amazing location in Wynwood called Senior Planet. It's a free center down there. So it's a huge resource for people down in the community. People think of Wynwood as a kind of the arts center. It's kind of all for young people and people that are hanging out in the clubs. But in fact, that community still has thousands and thousands and thousands of older people living right in the zip code, many of whom are lower income, many of whom are Spanish speakers, super diverse, that have been there for decades. And there aren't a lot of community centers there. There aren't a lot of facilities. And so we were able to locate a center right there in the middle of Wynwood to kind of showcase what's possible with technology and aging. A lot of people come down from all over the county and even outside in Broward and other counties to go there and sort of showcase what they're doing. But there's lots of people that walk over just from, there's Alapata right next door. There's people that live in the neighborhood. So we built this stunning center. We used a really cool architect that designs our programs from OATS. And there's design thinking. The guy's really great. And we put a beautiful mural on the front of the building with a local graffiti artist. And people are flocking there. It's getting great numbers. And so it's another example of the kind of stuff that we do with AARP that's making a big difference.
Yeah, that's huge. Okay, there's so many directions I want to go from here. Sure. But one of which I think you're pointing to, and something we talk about at Digital Access for All, is that Digital Access for All is connected with 3 key pieces, right? There's the skills, devices, and broadband access, right?
Yep.
So right, you need to be able to you need to have broadband, but to access broadband you need a device. But to do all that, you also need the skills to engage with it. And when you first started off, I was like, okay, their niche is skills. And then I'm also hearing as you've evolved over time, particular relationship with AARP, there's some attention being paid also to the broadband piece. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Where does devices come in? And would you say you all are kind of expanded in broadband, or is it just through your partnership with AARP, you're able to sort of play in that arena?
No, we're very, we always think of ourselves as pretty agnostic about tactics. So our goal, our mission is to harness technology to change the way we age. And so we're really focused, for the first question is, what are we trying to do with aging, right? Excuse me. If older folks are challenged by social isolation, for example, what technology solutions exist to help people get more connected? Well, there's Zoom and there's wearables and there's, there's AI for, drafting emails and things like that. There's also, in that context, though, there's a thing, there's a huge challenge around fraud, right? There's a constant threat of people trying to, get at you when you're out online. And so if you're having a technology solution for older people, they need a device of some sort to get online or to do something, and they need some way of connecting to the internet. But a lot of it is actually building a system around that where you're kind of addressing the whole problem in a relatively coherent way. So for us, we started teaching years and years and years ago. And in the early days, people all came to the libraries. There was a community center, community anchor institutions was the term. And a lot of the people we would teach would come down to the local senior center and they would use the labs. We built like 35 labs in New York. Actually, no, we built 40 labs in New York City, and we built labs in other places, San Antonio, Texas, and other locations. we were able to get people to come out. But, then as people became more commonly online at home, we were challenged with the question of, well, we don't have a subsidy for you. So we would help people understand how to make a smart choice. It's one thing to say, I want to get internet at home, but then you're faced with a bewildering set of options about how much do I need a, gigabyte downstream. There's companies that'll try to sell you that. Or do I need, can I get away with just a wireless connection? And so we helped kind of demystify and clarify that. One of the challenges for older people that's really a critical, an age-specific challenge is what I call platform dependency or platform sort of sensitivity. If you're 75 years old and you've never had broadband and you really haven't bought a lot of technology, and you decide, okay, I want to get technically, I'm going to live another 15 years. I want to get online at home. You are faced with a choice about what platforms to use. Are you going to get, fiber to the home, or are you going to use cable, or are you going to use cellular, or are you going to use a combination of those? Most people have cellular plus wireline if you can get away with it. What kind of device are you going to use? Is it going to be a tablet? Is it going to be a Chromebook? Is it going to be an iPad? Is it going to be are you going to use Apple? Or are you going to use Android? You're making all these significant decisions about the sort of, for want of a better analogy, like the technology language you're going to choose to speak. And when you make that choice and you start building in that ecosystem, it gives you certain options and it takes other options off the table or makes them harder to execute. If it turns out that the platform you choose is not the right one for you and you're 75 years old, you may not have another bite at that apple. That may be your last kind of big, I made a big decision to try this thing, and if it didn't work, it's like a higher stakes game for you. If you're 25 years old and you decide to try out Android and you don't like it, you go back to Apple, it's not the end of the world. I actually did that myself at one point. I got so sick of Apple and I was so frustrated that I went over to Android and I started using all non-Apple stuff. And then after a while, I got dragged back into the Apple universe. But it took a few years and it wasn't a big deal for me because I had that kind of longer horizon. But for older people, the platform risk is much higher. And so if you're going to help people with this is a long answer to your three legs of the stool question, but we got drawn into helping people think about what technology to adopt and get them to understand, for example, if your family is on one platform, that helps you make a smarter decision. Finding the low-cost options for people is usually a really important first step. You can always upsell or spend more, but start with understanding where the cheapest things are. Time Warner, for example, for many years had a $15 a month internet connection that was available for anyone who called up and asked for it, but they didn't advertise it because they didn't make very much money on it. So I cannot tell you how many thousands of people I got signed up for the $15 a month Time Warner cable system because it was mission relevant for us. They were not on the internet. And Time Warner was happy to have us do it because they were people that were new subscribers. So we focused on connectivity that way as a sort of activist approach to it. And wherever we could advocate, we were testifying at hearings and public officials and things like that. But we did advocate for the connectivity side. On the device side, we help people make decisions about what they're purchasing. We do that to the present day. We just went to CES this year. We go to CES, that big consumer electronics show in Las Vegas, and we walk the floor until we're, our eyes are like glazing over, looking at the thousands and thousands of different kinds of technology devices. And then we pick and choose. We actually bring senior volunteers onto the floor of CES and walk around with older people and say, what do you like? How do you feel about this? Is it a good thing for you? We do a lot of testing and playing around with different things like VR, which is a big option, or AI, or different kinds of tech innovations. And we help people think about what's relevant for them in their homes. We do a tech report every year that helps people understand kind of what we're thinking about as like hot new things or home automation or different sorts of things. So we're interested in devices as a kind of tactical way for people to think about how they're going to use tech. We're interested in connectivity as a sort of best choice that you can make and thinking about investing in resilience for your own home. And then, of course, we're really specialists in the training and the building of a really positive environment around it. It's not just, sometimes when people talk about digital inclusion as like devices, access plus skills, it feels a little static to me. It feels a little like a kind of like a stable thing, which, because the model they always use is a three-legged stool, right? And for me, I feel like I'm I'm trained as a social scientist. I have a PhD in political science, which don't tell anybody.
Too late.
I taught college for 16 years at Columbia, and we used to taught a lot of courses on social entrepreneurship and thinking about how to make how to sort of evaluate change in the world. And to me, social impact is such a dynamic and such a flexible set of things going on. The richness of it is that it's very cultural. And it's almost, you have to think a little bit like an anthropologist sometimes about, we're trying to make something happen. How can we kind of align the norms of people's behaviors? I know that sounds like a weird concept, but like if it's assumed that when you're 70 years old that you're going to like use technology to be active and fit, we have 500 people in our fitness class today, right? That's becoming a norm now. We have thousands and thousands of people that are using technology to be physically active. And it's not weird anymore when you talk to somebody and they say, oh yeah, I've got my, my wearable on the, I use my watch to find out what my heart rate is and things like that. So by creating a kind of tech positive and an innovation positive environment for older people and actually capturing the energy that they're bringing to the equation, half the time it's not us coming up with a new idea. It's some like 90-year-old walking into the center and saying, have you looked at the new Apple, VR system? And we're like, okay, let's look at that.
Let's look at it, yeah.
So we're capturing some of the energy that people are bringing in these social contexts. And that to me is sort of more of a framing for how we think about digital inclusion or a good complement to this sort of static model of the three legs on the stool.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say is that not that there's not value to the three legs of the stool. It's also that there's like a flexibility to it. There's a blurriness between the three, and there's a co-creation that needs to happen with the actual people that you're working with that are going to be informed. It's not just something you're doing too. It's also something you're doing with the people that you're trying to impact.
That's right. And you have to, kind of work with people's goals a little bit. Sometimes, about something like 10% of Americans don't really use technology. They don't want to, and of any age. There's younger folks that are not online, and there used to be the
10%.
Yeah, it's a lot. The numbers are pretty significant. Some of them, they don't always pop up in all the surveys, but because they can't be found. But there are a lot of people out there that don't. They're either what I would term sort of modern Luddites in a positive way. By the way, it's not a criticism. I think it's wonderful if you by choice understand what your what the costs and benefits are, and you choose to live in a non-technical lifestyle. That's a powerful thing. It's like being a vegetarian, right? Like you're doing something against the mainstream that costs you some real effort to execute it or implement it, and it has it's a very strong, important personal choice for people, and it has nothing to do with age. It can be a young person realizing how addicted everybody is to the phones, or wanting to live more in a natural environment, people living off the grid, and so that kind of reference point for our demographic of like the non-tech demographic, right, exists in older adults, of course, as well. It's probably more pronounced even in people that are much, much older because they didn't grow up with the tech. So they learned to live without it in the first case. And so there's still people that I come in contact with. There's a friend of mine in Louisiana that I met when I was down there working on a boat a few years back. And his name's Chester. And he was taking care of his wife. And Chester would come over and help me on my boat. Like he did a lot of varnishing and stuff. And he was we would sit there drinking a beat of beers at sundown and start talking about technology. He's like, I don't use any of that technology stuff, and I'm like the big expert in getting seniors to use tech, so we would have these long discussions about it. And I concluded that Chester, to get from where he was, which was that the only technology he uses is a television, to being active with some of the tech was probably too much trouble for him, and he was perfectly fine without it. So his goals are different from somebody who wants to use tech. Mm-hmm. Might be his next door neighbor, for all I know, who is maybe the exact same demographic, but would really benefit from the technology in terms of the learning that he's going to do. We're doing, we interviewed a woman recently who was traveling 3 hours each way for her doctor visits. She lived in a remote part of, I think it was Utah, and she was traveling these really long distances to drive to her doctor visits. And we got her online through Senior Planet. We actually have a Senior Planet licensing program where your local library or senior center can sign up for Senior Planet curriculum. Mm-hmm. We'll teach your staff, so like your librarian or your local digital navigators and stuff, we'll teach them how to teach our curriculum and use our methodology over just like 5 sessions online. And then we'll give you a free license to use the curriculum for a full year. Mm-hmm. So it's a phenomenal resource. It's like $10 million of the curriculum, and people at these local centers can access it. So her local center was a Senior Planet licensing site. She found out about the internet. She got online. She got really excited about it. In the course of doing all this, we have a course called Digital Culture, where it's about really understanding how to use technology. She found out about telemedicine. Mm-hmm. Nobody really explained it to her. And so she was like, well, can I do that? So she calls her doctor, and the doctor's like, yeah, of course we could do Zoom calls. So now she's saving like 6 hours of driving every month. And obviously, imagine what you go through to deal with the risk factors and things like that. She still goes periodically to the primary doctor. You have to physically show up periodically, but the quick check-ins that she was doing with her, how are you feeling, and do we need to, update your prescriptions? She can just do them on Zoom. And that kind of a benefit to some people, so powerful. So getting that kind of use case figured out, and then what does she need to do that? So she probably needs a tablet. Lower income folks who want to do more typing, we just sort of steer them toward the Chromebooks because they're a little bit easier to do that with, and they're not as expensive. But you figure out what her need case is, and then what kind of connectivity she needs, and whether she needs it at home or she can use Starlink if she's in a really rural area, and help people set up for success.
I mean, the impact of this work is huge, right? Yeah. These are individual stories of how your work has impacted people, and it's a story of so many people across the country. I mean, you're saying hundreds of thousands of people that you're impacting annually.
Yeah,
right?
we did 670,000 last year. I think we might get to 700,000 this year. And frankly, I'm amazed it's not more. Honestly, I mean, it's such a powerful benefit for folks, and the community is so positive. There's so much negativity today about our civic life, and people are so at odds, right? And at the same time, I spend a lot of time. I travel probably 1 or 2 weeks a month, and I meet a lot of people in a lot of different places where all over America from very diverse communities, and I'm continually struck by how the basic sense of people is that they want to be good neighbors and they want to live well. The level of creativity is still really powerful. I was in a thing in Miami the other day. I popped by the center on a Friday night. I was done with all the work I was having. I was flying out the next morning. And I decided to walk by the center like late at night just to see the neighborhood, at night when it's supposed to be kind of hip and cool. Go by the center at almost 9 o'clock at night, the center's still open. And I walk in because what is going on here? And I walk in and there's a Dominican art show going on run by mostly older Dominicans from the community in there. They've set up all these paintings that they're doing. They're showcasing stuff using the tech a little bit. They're taking pictures of things and uploading them and stuff. There's like 75 people there. They're playing merengue music in the stereo. And it was like this amazing, energized community and very diverse, like not just Dominican folks, but we have people from all the different like Caribbean countries and also, white people from the neighborhood and areas that are around there. It was like the kind of place that you walk into something and be like, I am proud to be part of this world, right? And I want to be here. And I feel like that's still really present for people. Like the average American, the average older American still does stuff that we can all kind of really get along and work well together. And Senior Planet tries to provide a platform for that. So we have a digital community on Senior Planet. It's called Senior Planet Community. If you go to seniorplanet.org/community, it's like a series of user groups where people have special interests. There's a photography group. There's a decluttering group. I was kind of like, decluttering, like how many people are going to be in a decluttering group? We've got like 600 people that are sharing decluttering tips and also kind of cheering each other on a little bit. And there's a fitness group. We've noticed that there's an underrepresentation of older men in a lot of programs. If you go to senior centers, they're often like 60 or 70% women, which is great, for the women. But we know there are a lot of men out there that are potentially would benefit from more social contact and more connection. And so on the Senior Planet community, we created a thing called the Man Cave. We have all these guys there's like, men that share their ideas and kind of talk about getting older as men and what that feels like. And the point of it is it's not commercial. Like we're not trying to sell people's data. We don't share any data. There's no advertising on the site. We don't have an agenda beyond just trying to help people live well together. And so the idea that, you've got, depending on where you do the age cutoff, 30, 40, and upwards million Americans that are older adults now that are using tech and are trying to figure out how to frame their futures. I could see us working with millions.
That'd be exciting. So there's two kind of questions I want to go forward with. One, like a theme from the symposium over the last couple of days was around partnership. And I think about your partnership with AARP. I'm sure there's countless other partnerships. You've referenced, libraries around the country and so on. What's the trick to partnership? I think at the Patterson Foundation, we talk about LWRCC, which is leadership, willingness, readiness, capacity, and culture. The idea of like when we're thinking about a partnership, being aligned on those 5 areas internally and externally, that's important. And you might not be 100% on leadership, willingness, readiness, capacity, and culture, but like at least let's reflect on that before a partnership. How do you think about that? How do you know when an organization's the right partner, and how do you engage with them in a way that's going to achieve the maximum impact you're trying to get to?
I don't usually say that's a great question because it sounds condescending, but that's a great question. Our very first program was a partnership back in Bedford-Stuyvesant. We were working with a local neighborhood group that helped finance and support the work. And I noticed a while back that I really can't think of anything that we've done that wasn't a partnership in the last 21 years. Some way, shape, or form, we're connecting with libraries or senior centers or nursing homes or corporate partners in millions of different ways. So it's interesting how important partnership is and how little attention is given to it. Most foundations, when you're applying for funds, or government grants do the same thing, they're like, we strongly encourage partnerships. And, as a nonprofit leader, you're like, okay, you dutifully go off and try to figure out how to do a partnership. The challenge is that partnerships they take time, they take work. They're not easy. They take resources, sometimes substantially more resources in partnership than you would spend if you did it by yourself. And the skill sets around partnership development are not evenly distributed in the systems. And so I love the way that you guys think about it because it's very sophisticated and it's I think it's a right way to come at it. I could use that framework and it would apply exactly to things that we do. We're currently working on a partnership with a group to build a program in a different state. And some of the things that the readiness factor is one that I'm not so sure of. Like, we're ready to do this, and they're kind of looking at 2026, 2027. Leadership is ready to do it, but the capacity side is different. And one group has higher capacity than the others in certain ways. So part of it, I think, is understanding. What I wish would happen would be that nonprofits and organizations that have partnership components would build that into the educational experience that people have. You get a certificate in partnership building or something. If you go to business school, they teach you to do deals. They teach you, like, there is a class on negotiation that you take, and you think about how to craft a deal and how to think about people's, things like the BOTNA. Do you know what a BOTNA is? The best alternative to negotiated agreement. They'll actually teach you to understand where the other side is coming from and from a business standpoint. And there's a sophistication to it. And I went to public policy graduate school and I read all the books, and no one told me how to build partnerships. It wasn't something that anybody thought about as a tactical or, a professional development skill. So part of it, I think, is getting people to appreciate the skill set that goes into building partnerships. There's the understanding how to scan an environment for the right kind of partners, because what you're describing assumes that you've got somebody that you're actually looking at. Yeah. But if I'm saying, like, I want to go do something in Tennessee next year, I go to Tennessee and I start scanning the landscape. First of all, how do you source or prospect for that kind of thing? How do you evaluate without having to physically visit each site? And then how do you understand where, maybe one site has a really willing and able and active leader that wants to work with you, but maybe they don't have a lot of capacity. Another site's got a lot of capacity, but it seems a little bit like crickets when you go visit the headquarters, right? So how do you choose between two imperfect options when you're doing it? And how do you bring your own resources to the table in a way that builds the partnership without blowing it up, right? So, for many, many years, we were always the tiny partner. So my strategy was, as a nonprofit entrepreneur, I had we were like, for years, we were like under 500,000 with our revenue, which in a New York City and the Northeast is not very large. And we would be partnering with like a nursing home, which will have a, $100 million revenue, or with we partner a lot with telecoms companies to do stuff. We partnered all over the country with Comcast, which had a low cost internet service, and we were helping people sign up for it. But how does like dinky little OATS and humble little me go to Comcast headquarters and sit down with their team in their big building and talk about how do we get 25,000 people to sign up for this benefit that is beneficial to them, it's mission related to me, and how can I get treated like an equal partner, or at least an integral partner, without getting run over by their business interests or our lack of organizational capacity. So we found that if we partnered upwards in the food chain a little bit by taking on larger groups as our partners, we could expand the resource pool and we could often get access to funding at levels that we wouldn't be able to get alone. So if I have a $500,000 budget and I apply to your foundation for a grant, I say I want a $500,000 grant, you're going to say, I'm not going to give you a single grant that's going to be your entire budget. But if I say, well, I'm partnering with, this big nursing home that has a large budget and we're sharing with them, and they're taking, and it's not 500,000, maybe 700,000, but they're taking 400 and we're taking 300 of it. Now it starts to make sense to you, right? And so we can partner with them. Their financial capacity and their reputational risk management, things like that, are a good kind of reference point or a complement to our organizational development stuff in terms of program. And so you start to kind of put together, it's almost like building a menu for a Thanksgiving dinner in a way. You got to get just the right pieces and remember who likes what and how to do it. But we built programs that way for years by kind of almost bootstrapping upwards with partners that were big enough that we could work with them, but not so exalted that they wouldn't talk to us. Now we're bigger, and so we're partnering with groups that are often local centers that are looking for support. The way we often do it is we try to balance, a lot of the partners are struggling financially that we work with. So we work with now, just last year, we have 500 sites in our licensing program. We have another 160 sites where we deliver programs directly with our own staff. And most of them, I would say the majority are, have a hard time paying for a trainer, for example, or a hard time buying a laptop cart for $10,000. So what we've started doing partly with our partnerships is trying to aggregate resources and re-grant those resources through the partnerships. So we did a project with Google a few years ago where Google came to the AARP Foundation and said, we want to use technology to help alleviate poverty. And the AARP Foundation, which is in one of the other affiliates, by the way, in the world of AARP affiliates, came to us and said, why don't we partner with you because technology is a piece of this. And we were able to access about $4 million of Google's money from the OATS side of the equation to train, I think it was 16,000 unique individuals in very underserved environments to use technology for workforce development skills, which is really a big heavy lift to get to people in sites and programs that are not used to doing this kind of work. One of the things we were able to do is re-grant $600,000 to local sites to help offset their costs for doing programs. It's because they have to buy technology, or they have to pay a local trainer. And so a $10,000 grant is the difference between them participating and not participating. So we did the same thing with OpenAI just recently where we took about $100,000 of OpenAI money and re-granted that out to community organizations, which are now getting all these questions about AI. You're a library, you're a housing group. And the door opens, somebody walks in and says, I want to know how to use AI to, write a will or to, my bank, rejected me for some document I need and I want to contest it. Can AI help me do that? Which is a great idea, but the local staff don't know how to do it. And so we're training the local teams to use AI as a tool to solve problems for people, but they also need support to do it. They need a way to get some money to pay for that. So we're re-granting and creating some equalizing funding there to balance those relationships out a little bit. So it's a lot of the time partnership development is a super practical set of challenges. Some of it is that social skill and trust matters a lot. I can go to a lot of partners and if they don't know us, say, listen, go to any city that OATS has worked in, talk to any partners we've been working with. There's a reason a lot of these people have been working with us for 10 or 15 years, because you keep coming back with the question of how do we make a system here that benefits both organizations, that's mission relevant for people, and that's not, where one side is taking advantage or being unreliable. And that's a heavy lift every year. We spend a lot of time nurturing and cultivating and maintaining, and a lot of it's based on having a great staff. And one of the things that makes a huge difference, I'm sitting here talking about myself all day here. I have this
podcast is about you. So
yeah, well, but they might be listening. But I have a banged up staff that are people that show up early and stay late and answer phone calls when they come in and are really, really generous with their time and supportive of partners. And we have a culture at OATS of being inclusive and trying to have that big tent and think about the institutional environment that we're working with. If we try to go it alone, we couldn't get to anywhere near the numbers that we're getting at even today, right? So our mission is only achievable through partnerships. And we know that, and we work really hard to make sure that stays the case. But it's part of, I would say, one of the top 2 or 3 topics that we have in front of us at OATS every day.
Yeah, so many lessons from there. I mean, things that I'm hearing are, there's a respect for that you're existing in an ecosystem. Like one of the to kind of give the TPF analog of that is that we always ask what's possible and who else cares.
Yep.
Right. You're not the only one that cares about digital access for older adults. Right.
Right.
So like a respect that there is an existing ecosystem, then like the capacity to engage with discovering who are the players there, and awareness about your role in the ecosystem, but also how your role should evolve over time, be as a small nonprofit versus a bigger one. And then in the actual engagement, there's so much that goes into actually building real trust, right?
Right.
I think some of the research around trust is that like the two key ways to build it are responsibility and risk, meaning like responsibility is like integrity, like you're following through on what you say you're going to do, and risk comes with challenges and vulnerability and that over time. And real partnership is like over 10 years, you're or whatever number of years of your partnership, you're following through. And the risk is like you've probably made some mistakes over time in those partnerships, but you've built in the systems to learn and grow and improve. And so there's been real, I assume, real trust built through that sort of process.
Yeah, I like that framework. I mean, I think we try to be, we're good at doing what we say we're going to do.
Yeah.
The risk factor is really important, by the way. We did a session a while ago that we sort of rotate the chairing of our staff meetings at OATS, and it was my turn to chair the staff meeting. So they asked what I wanted to pick as a topic, and I said, I think we should talk about failure. And people said, what do you mean by that? I said, I think we should have a meeting about how we fail and how things, understanding, just sharing stories of failure. Like we spend so much time trying to pretend that everything we do goes well, right? It's like rah, 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 we served all these people and we raised money and we did all this great stuff. But, a significant percentage of our innovative ideas fail. Like they just they don't go very well. And we shouldn't just pretend that didn't happen. And we shouldn't avoid talking about it and avoid sharing it. And so the staff were super uncomfortable with it, by the way. Like they when they wrote up the description for the meeting, it said something like sharing stories of, suboptimal outcomes or something like that. I was like, let's take out the euphemism and let's put back the word fail. Like it's okay to say it went badly. It didn't achieve what we were trying to do. And when I was trying to get there, they had a great meeting about it. People really, really shared some cool stories. And the point was not like some of the stories, I shared some stories of my failures, some of which were really, spectacular. And part of it was, there's stories where you say, well, we're learning from failure. Oh, look what we learned, how we produced something good out of it. I want us to get out of the framework that it always has to turn into a success. It's still okay that you tried something and it was an abject disaster and then you stopped. It's good enough to understand when something isn't working to just pull the plug and to say, we're sorry, this isn't worth continuing. And sometimes there's some broken eggs and we have to pick ourselves up and come back on Monday and do the next thing, right? And if we can't be honest about that and we can't be resilient enough to grapple with that, what you're calling risk, but I think of it as the deepest part of risk is when it blows up in some way, then we're not going to be very good partners. Then we're pretending everything is more rosy than it really is. And if I can't talk about something that didn't go well, then you can't talk about something, then we're not really communicating with that trust factor. So I had a funder many, many years ago that was from United Way, and they funded us to do this cool project with the schools. And we used to do some intergenerational work. And so we created this amazing curriculum that we thought was going to be picked up by the schools as a funded project that we could grow all across the school system in New York City. Curriculum was great. The numbers were great. The kids were great. The program went really well, but none of the schools bought it. And so at the end of the year, we had spent all this effort and we had like 3 schools participating. We had projected like 30, it wasn't even close. And so we turned it into like an after school initiative and it kind of puttered along for a bunch of years after that in different ways. But we reported to the funder and I remember writing the report and saying like, this one isn't worth continuing. And she left United Way. And I said, well, that's the end of that funding. And so we kind of went on with our next thing. And about a year later, we get a call from the same woman. And she's now the director of giving for an Australian investment bank called the Macquarie Group. And she calls back and says, I've taken over grant making for Macquarie, which is like complete. I've never heard of this place, but apparently it's like the Goldman Sachs of Australia. And they allowed me to take over a half dozen groups that I used to fund at United Way. And I picked you as one of them. And I was like, Catherine, why on earth would you pick us? We totally, like your money went right down the drain. And she said, actually, you did everything you said you were going to do, and you wrote up a report that was like a kind of a shining example of honesty and clarity. And that's the kind of organization we want to be investing in, because your next thing may be the next big thing. Do you know that they funded us for like 5 years? Their chief operating officer ended up being our board chair. They gave me an award for social impact, helping overcome isolation, like their international leadership award. And it was an amazing relationship, partly because we came out of it just being clear that the thing we did last year was such a train wreck that we at least acknowledged it, and we're trying to learn and move on. So that kind of
wow.
That's the backdrop to trust is super critical.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many lessons from there too, right? I mean, but yeah, the power of being honest and transparent, but it was rooted in that you had an outcome that you were trying to get to, and it was okay that you didn't get there, right?
Yep.
and that was it. So we're just about out of time here. So maybe just as a closing thing, is there any sort of, bringing it back to the symposium, is there any sort of, do you have a particular action step or a question that you're returning to New York City with?
I do. I've been chewing on this question. I have a dim feeling that we're leaving a lot of social value on the table when it comes to tech and aging, in the context of how we use data to help people do their work.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we've got resources out there in terms of a lot of people have technology. There's a lot of data being collected by various partners, the nonprofits, the seniors, the city agencies, healthcare institutions, et cetera. And there's a lot of focus on getting people online and getting people trained. But to me, the really critical piece is how we can actually work together using information and data to solve problems or help people live better. And I've been kind of pitching this idea that AI might be a critical tool for this. I'm talking to various funders and partners about it. The idea is, what would it look like if we were able to come to a place like, Sarasota and the counties here and say, how can we use tech to make sure people have access to the optimal transportation resources that they need, the optimal physical activity opportunities? And that can include that you're picking a wearable that's reminding you to do physical activity, but maybe there's a walking group that we can get you to participate in that somebody knows about from data, but there's no institution set up to encourage people to do it, right? How do we create, it's almost like closing loops to get these sort of social processes to take place that we have all of the ingredients for, but nobody's cooked the meal in a way, as an analogy. And I'm writing a bunch of stuff about that right now. I have half-baked ideas on my computer, and I've brought in a couple of funders to talk about it. But I need people to help me understand, is there something there? Because it's a little bit it feels a little vague and a little conceptual, but I also feel like it's extremely powerful when you think about if you could get people collaborating in that kind of higher level, more sensitive way using technology in a more advanced level, it might get us to kind of a phase 2 of a lot of the work that we've all started. But I think the actual disaster preparedness, how do we get everybody to get their data sorted out so that if there will be more disasters, that they're more resilient from it than they would have been without us involved. And I know we can solve that problem, but the process activities have not been designed yet. And I think AI can help us with some of that. And I think the partnerships are critical for the next part. So I want to come back down and talk to Sherry and others and say, what do you think of this? And can we, road test the ideas a little bit, maybe do a focus group or something? That's kind of what I came out of it with.
All right, let's keep the conversation going. Well, Tom, thank you so much for all the work that you do, your leadership in the space, and also for being here today and for coming down for the symposium. Thank you.
I'm glad I was able to do this. It's a lot of fun.
Listeners, thanks for joining us beyond the blog.